Yeah, yes. Oh, well, Jason turned it on for me, so. Uh. Oh, I guess it helps to open it up here. Frank, thank you very, very much for the coffee. I know I keep saying that, but I say it when I say it, I mean it. Well, it's always an encouraging sign when I see that it's not quite a full pot. Rob's here. Yay! And you're so good about that. Oh my. Well, I guess we should get started. Frank, would you feel comfortable praying us in? Well, welcome everybody. It's can you believe we are actually at the mid-year point? This is June 30th. It's the end of the first 6 months after today. We start the next half of the year tomorrow. Can anyone believe that time has just flown by so quickly? Especially, like me, I keep thinking, oh, yeah, we're still in the new year. Yeah, it's 6 months. Oh, well, it's just, yeah, I have not been paying attention. I want to thank Frank very much for last Sunday. Um, Not sure, well, I'm pretty sure what happened last Sunday when my car wouldn't start. I think it was me um, in too much of a hurry. Anyway, my car decided, hey, I'm going to sleep in today. You do whatever you want to do, but I'm not going to church. So, also thank a big thank you to Darren and Heather because um, um, they came by and rescued me, carried me over here, and then Brother Frank, without not knowing that when he got up that morning, he was going to be teaching the class. Uh, just stepped in admirably, and I really do appreciate that, as does the rest of the class and the congregation. So, big thank you to everyone. With that in mind, uh, last week our audio and video facilities were basically taking a break, or actually they were on the traveling scene. They were not here. For those of us who watched the class via streaming, you didn't get to see last week's class. So, what I thought I would do today is I would do kind of a summary of last week's lesson for the benefit of those who watch us streaming, and then we'll also take in chapter 6. I think we can do both adequately because chapter 6 is rather short. It's 12 little verses. So anyway, we'll if you don't mind backing up to chapter 5, and I'll just make a few comments along the way. And I will also, I know I've this is not necessarily something I'm doing every week, but when there's a song that just basically seems to lend itself to the subject matter, I got one for y'all to listen to. You may have be familiar with it very much. It's written by Paul Simon, and here it's written by sung by Simon and Garfunkel. We'll stop there. You're wondering, okay. That's a nice song. Yes, it brings back pleasant memories and all that, but why are you playing it, John? Well, it's the opening lyrics that kind of stuck in my head as I was reading the first part of chapter 5, where Solomon tells his readers and tells his audience, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few. That kind of sounds like, guys, slow down. You move too fast. You got to make the moment last, especially when you do anything having to do with God. Two components here in terms of slow down when you go to worship, slow down when you start talking. It's very interesting that a while back, archaeologists do, and when archaeologists do what archaeologists do well, which is to dig around and unearth things, sometime back they actually came up unearthing and digging up the southern wall of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And not just the southern wall, but the steps leading up to the temple. And there was something about these steps that were very remarkable. Each step was anywhere between 12 to 35 inches deep. Have you ever tried to go up steps, big steps like that? I have to confess, in my younger days, if I saw a staircase, I would run it up. I would run up those stairs. I mean, I'm not gonna take my time one step at a time. I would run up. I would take 2 at a time, maybe 3 at a time, always in a hurry, especially if, you're going to a class and man, I'm late. I'm already 2 minutes late. These steps are designed not to be taken 2 or 3 at a time. No way you can do that. Even taking them 1 at a time, you can't take them very rapidly. You got to slow down. What the archaeologists tell us is that those stairs were designed to force people who are going to the temple to walk with a very steady, deliberate tread. 1 step at a time. Slow down. What are you going to do if you're walking steady and deliberately? Well, you're going to be focusing on what you're doing. And maybe if you're going to worship at the temple, maybe you start thinking about, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? What am I going to think? What's going to go on during that service there? I don't have to tell you, most of us live in this kind of pressure cooker kind of age situation where you're always at least 5 minutes behind something. There's always another deadline looming in about 22 minutes or less, and you gotta make that deadline. You gotta show up. In fact, you gotta multitask. You gotta do 2 or 3 different things to keep people happy. Either the boss man or folks in your family or whatever. It's just that way. Solomon is saying that's not the way you approach God. You don't do it haphazardly. You don't do it rapidly. You don't do it as sort of, well, this is just one more thing I've got to do. Worshiping God is not just one more thing. It is the thing. And that's Solomon is saying you got to focus on that. You got to slow down. He also talks about matters of the mouth. And there are folks who are, we know folks who are a few words, and then we know folks who are of many words. Let's face it. Let's go ahead and call them babblers. They'll just babble, 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 babble on, and sometimes that's just a nervous habit. Hey, nobody's saying anything. It's just a little too quiet here. Well, I'll just start talking and kind of generate some noise. And Solomon's saying that's not really a good thing, especially where God is concerned. It's like, okay, God did make your mouth. He created your ability to talk and to speak and so forth. One way to honor that gift that he's given you is to use it wisely. Think before you speak. In fact, skip down to verse 4. Solomon says, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. In fact, Solomon says, this is so important that it is, verse 5, it's better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Ooh. Uh, how serious is that? If you don't fulfill your vow, verse 6, basically you're sinning. You're sinning against God. You made a promise to God and you're not fulfilling it. And he says, don't protest to the temple messenger, my vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Ouch. That's something we really don't think about, but does God take our words seriously? Yeah. Go back and read James. Read that nice little chapter about the power and the damage that the tongue can do. There's a reason why there are warnings like that, because what we say has the power to do good and also has the power to do a lot of evil. How serious or does God consider vows? How serious did the Jews of the time consider making a vow to God? Well, at least two examples. 1 Samuel, the very first chapter of 1 Samuel is about a lady named Hannah who's childless and she's driven to the point of despair. And she makes a promise to God, hey, if you will give me a son, if you'll give me a child, I will offer him, offer him back to you in your service. And God honors that request. And Hannah offers her vow. Was that a hard thing for her to do? I'm pretty sure it was. If she had her druthers, she probably would have said, it sure would be great to have this kid around, grow up, watch him grow up, and do all these things that kids do, and then take care of me when I and my husband get old. But she followed through with her vow. Another vow that was probably very difficult to keep. Go back into Judges chapter 11. Remember the judge by the name of Jephthah, and he was fighting the enemies of Israel. And at one point, he makes a vow to God that, God, if you will make me victorious in this battle, I will sacrifice the first thing that I see afterward. Well, God helps him win. Jephthah goes home, and what is the first thing that he sees? His daughter coming through the door. And not all commentators agree on this point, but there are several who say that's indeed what Jephthah did. He offered his daughter in sacrifice. It was a hard thing to do. But these are people who took vows so seriously that they'd rather do the hard thing that deprived them of the things that they loved rather than risk the wrath of God. And Solomon is making that point. If you make a vow to God and you don't fulfill it, you're sinning against God. You're provoking God's anger. You're running the risk of making him angry at you. And even to the point where God may respond by destroying the work of your hands in terms of all the things that you have worked for. So be careful what you say. In fact, I think there's a Vacation Bible School verse about that. Be careful what you say, little tongue. Anyway, it still applies today as adults, perhaps even more so. And then further down in chapter 5, two basic components of chapter 5. The first 7 verses that we just looked at were kind of a weird break, because up to this point, Solomon has been very, very philosophical. He's been telling us some hard truths about life under the sun. And then he gets to chapter 5, and then these first 7 verses, it's like, okay, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to give you guys some advice, which he does. And then he kind of segues back into this is what life is all about. Well, we've talked about worship in the last 7 verses. As we go into the rest of chapter 5, we talk about, or Solomon talks about, wealth, money. Surprise, surprise, and spoiler alert, money isn't everything. Oh, really? Yeah, that's what Solomon is saying. Uh, First couple of verses here, 8 and 9, he says, if you see the poor being oppressed, justice and rights denied, don't be surprised, because there's this bureaucratic system where everybody has got his hand out for a take some way or another. There are some folks who like to point to what they call banana republics, uh, kind of third world governments where that kind of run on, or the government is oiled by the soliciting and the acceptance of bribes. Some countries call it's known as the mordida. It's the bribe or the kickback. And, probably none of us here should be bragging about our wonderful way of life here, because there's probably some corruption like that even in the situations that we live in. But what Solomon is saying, hey, look, everybody's got his hand out. One level of government or ruling after another, and it goes all the way to the king's house. Verse 9, even the king himself profits from the fields. Well, thanks, Solomon, Mr. King. You're doing so well here taking care of things. But Solomon is actually just acknowledging a harsh fact. In fact, at the time Solomon was writing this, one thing, Israel, for how wonderful it was in terms of material wealth and prosperity and all the good stuff going on, Solomon was beginning to lay on heavy duty taxes to the people to pay for all these little pet projects that he mentioned earlier in Ecclesiastes, building the great projects, the fields, the temple, the great buildings and so forth. That costs money, especially if they're not generating revenue. You got to pay for it some way. How does government pay for things like that? Well, they implement taxes. And if the taxes aren't bringing in enough revenue, they create more taxes, or they raise the taxes. And this was a problem toward the end of Solomon's reign. In fact, that would be a major factor in the eventual splitting up of the nation of Israel into two countries. But that's for another class. But Solomon even says, hey, look, wealth is a problem. Taking money that, to satisfy the people in charge runs all the way to the top. And then verse 10, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. How true is that? That correlates with 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, where Paul warns the love of money is the root of all evil, all kinds of evil. People who, in fact, he warns and basically says it's flat out fact, people who love wealth so much that it's the absolute number one priority, basically open themselves to all sorts of grief and hardships by chasing that wealth. Verse 11, as goods increase, so do those who consume them. What benefit are they to the owners? How true. This is a news flash to people who think, hey, more money will buy me happiness, or it will buy me more happiness, or it will at least alleviate some of the unhappiness. One of the things about if you come into sudden wealth, if you play the lottery and hey, lightning strikes and you have that perfect lucky number and you've just won $20 million or whatever the jackpot is, there are stories of people who basically, hey, I have heard from people that I haven't seen since I was in the first grade. And then I've also heard from people who say, hey, remember me? I'm one of your old buddies. I never laid eyes on them. Hey, but I heard you won the lottery. Good for you. Hey, I don't want to put the touch on you, but I'm just having a couple of rough patches here in my life. You wouldn't mind loaning me a little money, would you? And Believe me, I promise I'll pay it back. Famous last words. That leads Solomon to say the sleep of a laborer is sweet. The laborer who basically works a day job and he gets by with what he earns on his daily wages. His sleep is sweet, whether he eats little or much. For the rich, even with a full stomach, they can't sleep. The more you have, the more you have to worry over. And yes, that can cost you your sleep, some peaceful minds. Verse 13, I have seen a grievous evil under the sun. That under the sun element is, I think that's now number 15 in the number of times it's shown up in the text. It's a few more to come. Wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners. Wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there's nothing left for them to inherit. Gee, where would our Southern writers be without ruined families? People who were wealthy at one point in time, and then they lose that money, they lose that influence, and they're still kind of sort of at the top of the social order, but they've run out of everything. I mean, that's kind of how many novels, how many plays have been written on that theme? If we didn't have all those episodes of families who have lost wealth through generations, what would Tennessee Williams or William Faulkner have to write about? The best they could do might be writing tire ads for Sears. There really wouldn't be much else to write about. Verse 15, everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil, so that they can carry in their hands. Brother Solomon is having a Brother Job moment here. Yeah, gee, that sounds familiar. Well, yeah, look at Job chapter 2. Solomon's going to have another Job moment next chapter or two. But Solomon's making a point. Doesn't matter how much or how little you acquire or accumulate in your life, you can't take it with you. It does not convey into the next life, into eternity. Just doesn't work that way. As everyone comes, so they depart. What do they gain since they toil for the wind, since they chase that wind that they can never catch? All their days they eat in darkness with great sorrow, sickness, and anger. Gee, that's just the way I would love to eat. Not. Verses 18 and 20, Solomon makes, basically he returns to one of his major conclusions. It is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun. Number 16. During the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot, be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them busy and with gladness of heart. So Solomon, this is a basic theme of Ecclesiastes. Be happy with what you've got because it is a gift of God. And he also adds here, try not to think about it. If you think too much, you get too thinkish. I think you're right. Everything under the sun, yes. There's everything under the sun which basically correlates or corresponds to this present world system. And Solomon is not saying this is the way things work up in eternity. This is not the way things work in heaven. This is not God's ultimate system of what's fair and what's right and what's just and what's good and true. This is This is the world system we have that, started out okay until sin entered it. Thank you, Adam and Eve. And thanks to that choice, sin has come in and warped things. It's not totally warped. There are good things in here. Solomon keeps pointing that out. But the presence of sin, the impact and the effect of sin, is going to take everything that you have that you can see, touch, smell. It's going to warp it. It's going to corrupt it. There's just no way out of it. You're going to have things that are going to happen that you're not going to be happy with. And, sideline, hey, note to all you atheists, if you insist on living life without God, this is as good as it gets. Enjoy it while you can, warts and all. That's, yes. You know, and probably there are some languages where that just wouldn't work out, but Darren made a very good point. Good homophone, you can substitute under the sun, S-U-N, with under the sun, S-O-N, and you have a choice of how you want to live your life, this present world system or the one that's offered by Jesus. So here we are, chapter 6. I've seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on mankind. It's common among all men. God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honor. The old pleasure, treasure, success syndrome there we talked about earlier. And God gives them all these wonderful things so that they lack nothing their hearts desire. But God does not grant them the ability to enjoy them. And strangers enjoy them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. A man may have 100 children and live many years. How important was it to have children? Well, we just talked about Sister Hannah, who just was brokenhearted that she was childless. She could not have any children. That's why she was pleading with God in tears. But children, as one of David's psalms says, children are a blessing from the Lord. And children, the more the better, because that an abundance of children was seen as a sign of God's blessing to a man and a woman. Solomon says, hey, a guy can have 100 children and he can live long time, but no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive proper burial, that's another highly important thing in Jewish culture, to be buried properly, not haphazardly. If you can't enjoy what God has given you, and on top of that you receive the insult of not even being buried properly or not even being buried, I say that a stillborn child is better off than that man. Ouch. That is kind of a harsh statement there. Why? And then Solomon talks about, okay, what is about, let's admit what problems a stillborn child has, what that stillborn entity will miss. It comes without meaning. It departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. It's this in many cases. It's a stillborn child is an anonymous figure, may not even be given a name. Sometimes he or she is, but nobody knows that individual because that individual never got to live, never got to experience the life. Verse 5, though it never saw the sun or knew anything, it has more rest than that man, even if that man lives 1,000 years twice over, but fails to enjoy his prosperity. Do not all go to the same place. Did you notice what Solomon has said here, backing up? He says it's better to be stillborn than to live and go through the hardships of an unhappy life. He's kind of channeling once more Job. Uh, I tried to look for a particular verse to quote here, but basically it's a long passage. Go back and compare verses 3 through 6 here in chapter 6 with Job chapter 3. And Job is pretty much saying the same thing. He basically says, I would have been better off if I had never been born. And here's why. And he kind of echoes the same thing. You know, at least I would never, Job said, at least I never would have gone through all these horrible experiences that I've been put through. And Solomon says, an unhappy man is not much better. I don't care how wealthy he is. I don't care how long he lives. I don't care how many kids he has. I don't care how many of these signs of prosperity and blessings from God he may receive. If he cannot enjoy what he has, he's better off not to have lived at all. Then interesting, picking up on verse 7. Solomon kind of goes into Proverbs 2.0. It's kind of like, okay, all the Proverbs that kind of got left off in the book of Proverbs. Well, I got a few left over here. I'll put them in here. Starts here in verse 7 and it continues into the next chapter. But what we have here is not just random proverbs, but they're basically, you might call them under the sun proverbs. These are proverbs, wise sayings that reflect upon life under the sun. And so, he says, verse 7, everyone's toil is for his mouth. Everyone works to eat, satisfy that hunger in their stomach, yet their appetite is never satisfied. What advantage have the wise over the fools? What do the poor gain by knowing how to conduct themselves before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. What you talking about, Solomon? I think probably a good modern day proverb comparison would be, a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. Be happy with what you got. If you got something that you can eat, you can use, you can spend, you can enjoy, don't spend your time grumbling and being upset about the stuff that you don't have. Solomon seems to be saying here. To be in that situation where you've got something, but you're grumbling about nothing, basically he says this too is meaningless. It's a chasing after the wind. Verse 10, whatever exists has already been named, and what humanity is has been known. No one can contend with someone who is stronger. It's a kind of a fatalistic verse here. Probably this is a loose translation, but hopefully somewhat accurate. Whatever happens, happens. And basically what already is happening has been set in stone, was set in stone a while back, long ago. You can't argue with fate. Then I love verse 11 here. The more the words, the less the meaning. And how does that profit anyone? How true. The more you talk, the less you say. How many folks have we run into? How many folks do we listen to on TV or the radio who just babble on and on and on? And some are just babbling so much that they're just concocting word salads. They're just, it's like, oh, I like to hear myself talk. And you get that sense because whatever they're telling you is either makes absolutely no sense or it's so inane and so banal. It's just, you get this sense that when you meet that person who just talks at you after a while, and when you leave, you kind of feel like, I feel 20% less intelligent than before I encountered this guy. And, That is so true. Yes, it really does. I think there's a Mark Twainism that, and he may have been quoting it from some Greek philosopher who said, it's better to keep your mouth shut and be thought of as a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Something like that. I will say this when when I have done editing, when I've edited other people's work, one of the key things that I've done as an editor is basically to take out meaningless, useless words, words that just really do not tell you anything. One particular phrase that some of my colleagues loved to say, and when they were writing reports, they would say, "This project was successfully completed." And I would always have to cross out successfully. What does it, and there were folks who would object to that. Oh no, you got to leave that word in. And I would ask them, okay, let's do the opposite. Have you ever had a project that was unsuccessfully completed? Well, I guess not. Okay, take it out. But there's there are people who just feel like, okay, there's nothing that can't be cured by piling on more words. And Solomon is saying it doesn't work that way. It profits. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm not talking about you, Jason. Yeah, you wouldn't want to be mentioning it in your report. Oh, yeah. Then one more verse, and we're done. Solomon says, "Who knows what is good for a person in life? During the few and meaningless days they pass through like a vapor, like a shadow, like Hebel. Who can tell them what will happen under the sun after they are gone?" Hmm. You have to wonder sometimes about Solomon how much he knew about eternity, because here and then, just a few verses earlier, he talks about, doesn't everybody go to the same place when they die? And here he says, what's going to happen to them under the sun after they're gone? Well, under the sun, when you die, you get buried, and eventually you're forgotten about, and that's it. But you have to wonder if Solomon just genuinely didn't know, or he was just basically teasing the fact out that, hey, there is something more to life than just life under the sun. I'll just leave you with what Paul says in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 10, where he says, as Christians, as members of God's family, we have obtained the salvation that is in Jesus Christ with eternal glory. It doesn't end at when you die physically. Life goes on. And if we are in Christ, if we are part of the family of God, it goes on gloriously. So that's chapter 6. And oh, by the way, we are now at the halfway point in Ecclesiastes. We're 6 chapters down. We got 6 chapters to go. So chapter 7, the under the sun proverbs continue, and we'll look at that, if you will. Please take a look at that during the week, and next Sunday, Lord willing, and my Honda willing, we'll be back, and we'll discuss and explore chapter 7. Y'all have a great week. Hey, it doesn't look like we're going to, unless something happens with Hurricane Beryl coming our way directly. It's going to be hot and dry, so stay hydrated, and have a safe and happy 4th of July. And see you next week.